Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Charleston Literary Festival. I'm Diana Reich, founder and currently Senior Artistic Director of the festival. And I'm delighted to present this session's speakers, the author Claire Messud, who's furthest from me, with broadcaster Georgina Godwin, as well as to thank the sponsor for this event, board member Laura Gates. Thank you, Laura. Claire Messud is a senior lecturer on fiction at Harvard University. She's the author of 6 works of fiction herself, the most recent of which she's talking about here, This Strange Eventful History, was longlisted for this year's Booker Prize. And it was also one of Oprah's most anticipated books for 1924. It's a multi-generational family saga about displacement, homesickness, and renewal, based on the wanderings of her own family. Here's what the Booker judges said about it. The novel opens in June 1940, when Paris falls to the Germans, a moment that, like many important historical events, casts a centrifugal force on people's lives. The compelling narrative, Claire's compelling narrative, follows 3 generations of a Franco-Algerian family in their migration around the world, from Algeria to the US, Cuba, Canada, Argentina, Australia, and France. Epic in its scale, while intimately rooted in each character's internal landscape, the novel reminds us how literature can be expansive and timeless. Claire will be in discussion about the novel and the experience of fictionalizing her own family with Georgina Godwin. Georgina was born and brought up in Zimbabwe, where she had a successful career as a pioneering journalist. She now lives in the UK and works for the digital magazine Monocle, which covers international affairs, business, culture, and design. Georgina is its books editor. She's the books editor of the station. So I'll hand over now to Claire and Georgina, who'll take us on an international journey where private lives intersect with momentous world events. Claire Messud and Georgina Godwin.
Diana, thank you very, very much indeed. And I am so delighted to be here in your wonderful city. You guys get to live here. I can't
It's
believe.
so beautiful.
No,
it's
right?
so beautiful. Yeah, we're very lucky to be here.
Very, very lucky to be here. And so kind of you all to come out to hear what Claire has to say. I am so honored to be speaking to you today. Your book is so beautiful. And as Diana said, I mean, this strange eventful history, she said a work of fiction. But it does closely mirror your own family life. And I wondered, perhaps if you'd start then by telling us about your own family history.
So, insofar as it pertains to the novel, because I could tell you a lot about my family. We could be here all night. I'd tell you my family history, but the novel's about 3 generations of a family, and it's based on or inspired by my father's side of the family. My father his parents were Pieds-Noirs, which is the colloquial name for French colonials in Algeria, and the family origins were, which is part of the history that maybe people aren't aware of. So the French colonized Algeria in 1830. And Algeria regained its independence in 1962. The family members way back came on my side, went to Algeria soon after it was colonized, and they were French, Italian, Spanish, and Maltese. So people think of it as a French colony, but there were actually immigrants from around the Mediterranean. So it's about 3 generations in a family, and it starts as Diana said in 1940 and ends in 2010. Mm-hmm. So,
what sparked the desire to write this?
Well, as you know, and it's something that maybe we'll talk about, the end of colonialism is something, post-colonialism is something that I think we think about globally, and we talk about in academia quite a bit. But the colonial side of post-colonialism, what happened to the families who were colonial families, is not something that's so much discussed. And so my father never spoke of it. You wouldn't have known. I grew up in Australia and Canada and the United States. My mother was Canadian. My parents met speaking English. We spoke English in my household. I was really, I was sort of distantly aware of this history, but not until I was at university, I was really not very aware. And so part of it was wanting to, I think I came to realize that my father lived unknown and unseen by everyone around him, including us. And so I wanted to see and to know, to try to understand.
I mean, so in a way, this book has been gestating, if you like, for most of your life.
Yeah, yes. And it's also worth saying, I mean, that the early, there's a first section in 1940, and my grandfather, so this is a digression, but I grew up thinking, I want to be a writer. And then I would think, I am like Athena, springing fully formed, a writer. And then I realized that actually everybody in my family had wanted to be a writer. And that, clearly they'd been standing over my crib saying, right. And my mother wrote many amazing letters, but my grandfather, my father's father, actually wrote a novel and a collection of stories that he tried to publish in the 1930s and wasn't able to. And then in his retirement, he wrote this very long family memoir for my sister and me, just for us, handwritten. And so I, for a long time, hadn't read all of that. And that covers 1928 to 1946.
And that he called Everything We Believe In.
Yes.
What did they believe in?
So they believed in a lot of stuff. but the thing, and it's actually, I quoted in the book, but it was in a letter, I quoted out of context in the book, but there was in a letter that he wrote for my father and my aunt to be opened in the event of his death and his wife's death during the war. They didn't die, they survived the war, but it was for their children who were children. In a very sort of French, orderly, taxonomic way, he said, these are the important things for you to know about us, about our family. We are Mediterranean, we are Latin, we are Catholic, we are French, in that order. And of course, I am a lapsed Protestant North American. And so it really was learning about a world. I had, of course, I visited, I knew my grandparents well. I spent time with them, but to really understand where they came from.
And I mean, the thing is, you talk about Algeria being colonized, but it was different from other colonies in that it was really a part of France.
Yes. So I mean, we could. I mean, because I was asking you about your growing up in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe was maybe more traditionally what we think of as a colony.
Very, very much a British colony, and so you've got people living there who sort of think of Britain as home, but you've also got people who are genuinely white Africans, like me, who are born there, who have no other home, who have many cases, no claim to any other passport. That's all you are. Right. But of course, what you come to with us, with you, and possibly also to some white people that live in the southern states of America, is historical shame.
Yes, inevitably, and I think one of the things that because colonialism is shameful and was shameful, and I think one of the things that I think about is that with the end of World War II, it was a very important global concern to end colonialism and to work for government and autonomy for all nations, right? That's part of what the UN was set up to do. But if you think about, if you think about, say, this country, which is also a country of colonial settlement, just with more colonists, way more colonists, right? But if you think of having to come very quickly between sort of 1945 and 1962, which in historical terms is quite short, to a completely different worldview, never having questioned that this was your home, that this was where you would spend your life, to coming to understand that it isn't, and some people were able to accept morally that it shouldn't be, and some people were not able to accept morally that it shouldn't be. And as you may know, Camus is the sort of famous is one of these people who sort of famously was trying to walk a complicated tightrope between his understanding of what was just and the passions of his heart. And he said, it's often quoted out of context, it's more complicated, but he said at the time of the Nobel Prize, when he was given the Nobel Prize, he said, between justice and my mother, I choose my mother.
And it's also what your mother country means to you, because, of course, what happened to many Algerians was France rejected them. They grew up thinking, well, we are actually French, but they weren't.
Well, and this was true also, of course, for a significant community of Algerian people, as that's to say, indigenous Algerian people, who fought alongside the French to keep Algeria French. And they were called the Harkis, Harkis, and they were abysmally treated by the metropole. And they were, of course, forced to leave at the time of independence, and they moved to France, where they were treated as if they were almost criminals and were put in camps. And there was a French novel a few years ago by someone named Alice Zeniter that won Prix Goncourt, and it's after the Elizabeth Bishop poem. It's called The Art of Losing. And that starts with the story of her, I believe, her grandfather, and so I feel that and there was also the fact that, yes, for white colonial Algerians, when they went back to France or went to France, and some of them, like the thing that Camus had never seen snow. All French children study the same things at the same time, and so they read about the little boy in the snow while in Algeria, where it never snows. But those people were demonized by the French.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd never seen snow.
Did you have textbooks?
Absolutely.
Or
and every depiction of Christmas was, snowmen and little robins. I've never seen a robin. and then suddenly here I am in my sort of 20s, and there was snow, and it was quite extraordinary. And then that relationship also with people in Britain going, you say you're African,
right. Right.
You're not. But what other identity do you have? And I think that's what your book really goes into, is this whole question of identity, but also the juxtaposition of identity and landscape or country, what it means to be of a country, but to be a type of person. And you talk about that a lot.
I just want to ask, how old were you? Were you in your 20s when you first saw snow?
21. It was my 21st birthday.
Wow. Wow.
And I was in Sweden on tour. I used to be a very bad actress.
But how fabulous, but how strange.
Yeah. Weird.
Yeah.
And I still, I'm in my 50s now, I get a thrill when I see the snow.
Do you, and have you been back? Do you go back?
No, unfortunately, because I started the first independent radio station in Zimbabwe, they took a pretty dim view of that, because I was telling people that perhaps they didn't have to vote for the ruling party and that there was an alternative. And so they thought that maybe I shouldn't come back. So they've made me an enemy of the state. So sadly, I left with my book on the bedside table. I'll be back in 6 months when we've sorted all this out, when we've won the election. That was 20 odd years ago. So, but you know what? I'm in Charleston now, and life has worked out fine. Also, why are we talking about me? This is about you.
But what I would say is that I think that that response, that last response, which I think, in a way, that's also what the book is about, is this idea that you turn the page and you go on.
Yeah.
And I think it is actually, there are huge, I'm not being very articulate. The 20th century, just as much as the 21st, or indeed perhaps more, was a century of crazy migrations and expatriations and exiles and the upheaval and tumult of countries. And so there's a huge cohort of people who actually live in the world in that way. This is where I am now, okay? this is all right. Let's make the best of it. And I feel like, often people who are driving taxis, right, who were, a surgeon in the country that they came from and are driving a taxi. I remember meeting a Russian woman, who was writing for the TLS, and when she arrived, this is from the Soviet Union, when she arrived in the UK, she was a chambermaid. That sense, that's an entire, it's almost like that's a great international nation of people.
And people shut it down, don't they,
Yeah.
from generation to generation, and refuse to talk about it. My father, for instance, I had no idea he was actually a Polish Jew, changed his name, moved to Africa, reinvented himself as an English gentleman. You don't know any of that stuff. Your family had so many secrets. But what I'm interested in here is the epigenetics of it, that inherited trauma, that we can feel the pain of those things we never knew.
Yes, and I think that, and again, I think that's true for great swaths of people. That sense. I remember when we moved a lot. My father worked for a French multinational, and as some of you may remember, in the 70s and 80s, there was a time when there were a lot of expatriate business communities. In some way, we think of colonialism as having ended, but there was a sort of global capitalism, colonialism that was ongoing. Of people going to Africa for oil companies. Or going, my father worked for an aluminum company, a French one called Péchinet, and that's a whole other conversation. That there were sort of 5 companies, I think, that dominated the global aluminum market at that time, and people, I went to boarding school with a friend whose father was with Kaiser Aluminum in Ghana. That was the German one. So I've lost my thread a bit. I have digressed, as is my wont.
As is your wont. You know what? But I'm glad you did, because I'm going to stop you there. Because really, Claire, it's time we talked about the book.
Well, that's a bit in the book.
It is in the book. But what I really want you to do is to introduce us to the characters that we meet in this book.
So there are these 3 generations, and the oldest generation is born with the century. It's Gaston and Lucienne, and they are at the opening of the book in 1940. Gaston is in his mid-30s. His wife is older. She's 12 years older than he is, and they have 2 small children. And he, having been the naval attaché, French naval attaché in Beirut, he was sent to Salonika, which is now Thessaloniki, in sort of Macedonian Greece, at the time of the beginning of the war, because the French wanted to be spying on the Italians to see what the Italians were up to. So that's why he was sent there, and he being. This is how, my Canadian mother used to say to my father, "Why are you guys the Bobbsey twins? Why is it that you have to go everywhere all together?" But my grandfather brought my grandmother and the children with him, and then had to send them post haste across Europe as it was the fall of France was imminent. Italy was about to enter the war. And they went back to Algeria. So that's where it opens. At that point, the second generation, François and his sister Denise, are children in 1940, and really the book is François' lifespan from that time until his death in 2010, and his Canadian wife Barbara comes into the picture, and they meet in the 1950s, and she becomes a character in the 1960s in the book. There are sections each decade at one moment. I thought of it as like putting wonderful talk earlier about neuroscience. I think the person I was thinking of was mentioned. Penfold, I think, was the putting probes in people's brains and realizing that it's all in there, so that if you touch a certain moment in the brain, a certain probe in a certain whatever neuron, I don't know what it would be, of the brain, that the whole, the patient will say, "I am on a canoe in Lake Ontario. It is October, I'm 12, a gull flies overhead, my father is paddling the canoe." I mean, it's all there. And so I wanted to write a novel that would be like that, going down in these moments sort of once a decade.
Like extraction mining.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, just like that. That's
Yeah.
what I wanted. So that's the sort of structure of the book, that there's almost always three, once two different perspectives in each decade in a moment. So it's 1940 and then 1953, early 1953, 1962, and so on.
And then, of course, there's the two little girls.
Yes, I forgot about them. That would be, me.
Well, no, I mean, because this is so interesting, because the only person that narrates in the first person
Yes.
is Chloe, who
Yes.
is the youngest of all of this. And for me, I mean, I want you to tell us about her, but I also want you to tell us if she is you.
Well, I mean, this yes and no to that latter question. I mean, I think one of the things that I've been trying to, I became a fiction writer because I like making things up. So people say, is it true or is it not true? And well, it's kind of true. A bunch of it's true, a bunch of it's not true. And the sort of analogy that I ultimately came to is like, it's paper mache. So you have your coat hanger and you make your coat hanger shape, and then you start winding sticky bits of newspaper with, around it, and you get a different shape. So that's sort of what it is, if that makes sense. So she's me and not me.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that, about novelizing the facts.
Well, the thing, there are so many things to say. I'm very interested at the moment in time and narrative, and the fact that reading and writing is something it's not like a painting. A painting, you can take in the whole picture at once, and then you can look closely at it, but you can see the whole thing. But narrative is linear in time, and you don't know what the story really is like or means until you get to the end. So you have a different experience along the way, different experiences at different moments. You have different experiences if you read it all in one go, or if you read it over a long time, or if you come back and read it 10 years later. These are all experiences that are related to time. But when you're writing the book, you have to be sort of like a drone that goes up tries to rise up above. Certainly by the time you get to revision, right? You rise up and you're seeing the whole thing, and you're saying, are the things that I want or need to make sense of the ending, are they sown, are they present early on? And so just one small example, which I mentioned, I think, earlier, in the early 1950s, there's a section of Denise, who's now a first-year university student in Algiers, studying law in her first year, and a car comes up on the sidewalk and hits her, and she sees in the car somebody that thinks she sees in the car, somebody that she went to school with.
Should you read that?
I could read that little. I could.
Yeah,
I could. Can I find it?
And just to, we're going to come back to this, but Denise, I don't know how many of you read it. I wanted to slap her, and you'll find out why.
Okay. So, okay. So, I don't want to read too much. So I'll read after she's been hit. So she's walking with two friends. The car comes up. She's on the outside. It hits her and goes back down, and she has to sort of crawl out of the. She never heard what Anne-Marie said because she was thrown suddenly into the air. Her feet vanished beneath her, and she landed hard on her tailbone. She had trouble articulating the experience in words. All the feelings, the sensations were so vivid, the collapse of time, the confusion. She could say now that it was what she imagined it might be like to be attacked by a shark, a great sudden brute force devouring you. But in this case, of course, it was not a shark, but a car. And in the same fragmented moments in which she felt the guttering of her coccyx all the way up her spine, and then the grit of the sidewalk digging into her palms as she tried to right herself, but instead tilted onto her hands and knees and crawled like an animal toward the low stone wall along the pavement in the petrol stink, a cloud of exhaust, while she heard Marie-José's squeals turn into screams. Like a stuck pig, they would laugh only a few hours later. But in those first moments, with the combination of Marie-José's screams and Anne-Marie's eerie calm, Denise wondered if she'd been disfigured or had lost a limb or at least a finger, or what had happened, what had just happened. And then And then she sees thinks she sees this girl. The man and the woman, the girl really, if it was in fact her classmate, Zora, yes, Zora, the name came back to her even as her certainty evaporated. Maybe it hadn't been her. Did it matter? Denise wouldn't report it either way. For all Marie-José said she ought to, she must. No, Anne-Marie demurred, an unfortunate accident, but you're fine, really, a moment's inattention on the driver's part. They were probably canoodling in the car, and then who'd seen enough even to pursue it? They'd been so shocked, all three of them. But here was the thing, she wrote to her brother. The car attacked her from behind like a shark. A blue deux chevaux, it mounted the curb and took a bite, as it were, and then slipped back into the ocean, back onto the road. But the car wasn't going fast. It could really have injured her if it had been going fast, right? It was perfectly calibrated. The speed, the silence, the suddenness. As if the driver had planned the whole thing, maybe a joke, but maybe to terrify or terrorize her, if you'd rather, to make her afraid just to walk down the street laughing with her friends, to make her afraid to be. Why would someone do that? To Denise, who wouldn't hurt a fly. Who was the driver? She had no idea. She'd seen only the back of his head, if even that, an impression of dark hair. But the girl, if it was Zora, well. And then I'll just read one last paragraph, which is a little bit later. And of course, the story would become properly a story a few years later, when the troubles were fully underway. When Denise was no longer in Algiers, none of them were by then, François in Paris and she at the hotel school in Lausanne, and Maman and Papa in Morocco, where the troubles found them anyway. But only then, after September 56, when Zora Drift bombed the milk bar, and a few months later, in late January 57, almost exactly 4 years after the deux chevaux knocked Denise off her feet, the bombing of the very automatic café to which Marie-José had run for her restorative coffee, and the automatic at the same time as the Coq Hardy and the Cafeteria, killing in all 4 and injuring 50 in a single afternoon. Only once all these things had happened, like fatal flowers blooming, did Denise go on to insist that she had definitely seen Zora Drift in the deux chevaux that morning, that she had been deliberately attacked, the driver the opposite of inattentive, that it was an early salvo of the insurgency, and that she, Denise, was lucky to have escaped with only torn stockings and a constellation of bruises.
I mean, she is such a victim in so many ways. Why does one want to shake her? What's her motivation? And indeed, the motivations of all the women vary so much. But Denise just seems like such a wet blanket.
You know, I think in not to conflate things, but that's what my mum felt exactly.
Even though we're talking about a fictional character.
Even though we're talking about a fictional character, but of the actual person who inspired such a character. But I think, you know, for me, one of the things that I was really interested in, and you know, was exploring in the novel is how, when something, it will seem like I'm digressing, but I'm not. But whatever. That this event happens and everybody has to leave. And each person deals with it in a different way. And so the Gaston character, who's very, 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 very Catholic, and he says, it's in God's hands. We are in the world like birds in the air. We trust in God. If this was God's will, so be it. And then there's François, who marries a Canadian, moves to North America, says nothing about it, and makes very good friends with Johnny Walker. And then there's Tante Denise, who just feels sorry for herself, who just feels like this thing happened to me, and in every iteration, everything, you know, I can read so many of the events that will happen in my life, I can read through this lens. And I can understand that I am a victim. Mm. And there are many other possibilities besides those 3. But I mean, we can't control what history throws at us. But each of us has to choose how we then respond.
Mm. And I mean, the thing about this book is that it's about how these characters deal with these massive events in history. Yeah. I mean, it really, the plot hinges on every single way they turn, something else is happening. And of course, we know how it turns out for the world, but what you give us is this wonderful kind of microcosm of how it turns out for this particular family.
Well, I guess I feel they are sort of everyman family, you know, that actually it's true for all of us in some way, you know, that we're all encountering history all the time. We are living, you know, as Confucius would have cursed, we are living in interesting times. We are living in much more interesting times than I would have wished. Yeah. And we have to make decisions, and we don't always know. We don't always have all the facts. We don't always know how those decisions will turn out. And that's, you know, that's how the book opens, is with Gaston having to make a decision in 1940, you know, about what he'll do.
But it also starts out with you having to make a decision. I love this kind of sort of conversation you're having with the writer. It's like, well, where do I start? And I could start anywhere, because this story is circular, right?
Yes, the story is circular, and also, and this is the thing, I teach creative writing, and I'm always saying to the students, right, that there's an E.M. Forster made a very, in you know, his craft book, the name of which is suddenly eluding me, but he talks about the difference between plot and story, which isn't exactly as you'd think. He says that the story is the king died, the queen died, and the plot is the king died, the queen died of grief. And the difference is, and then, and why, right? So the plot is and why. And then the order in which you tell things shapes how we understand them. So that if I know as a younger sister that when I walked into many a classroom and they would say, you're Elizabeth's younger sister, right? And they already had some a priori knowledge or idea about me that would shape the way they would treat me for the year ahead. It's a curse of the younger sibling, right?
Yeah.
I always say that about Germany, right? Like, certainly in our generation, what you knew was the war. And everything, then you'd learn about Beethoven, you'd say, well, I mean, of course, anticipating, you know, right? He wanted his music anticipates some, I mean, I guess you said about Wagner more than Beethoven, but you know what I mean? Everything is seen through that lens. So that's about the order that you tell things.
There's so much love in this book, and so many different kinds of love, and love for family is one of them. But looking at family love and those huge bonds, rearing a family in times of crisis becomes a whole different thing, and you really explore that.
Well, I think there's some sense that the family is what there is, right? And that, you know, I certainly, I don't know if that was that something that happened when, not when you were a kid maybe, but once your sort of homeland was lost to you.
Yeah.
Was there a feeling, my family is my home?
I mean, yes, I guess so. I mean, the thing is, and your family have gone through this too, it's like a bombshell of people. So I tell you where your home is. Your home is Facebook. No, but for people who have lost their country, I say there, lots of people would dispute it was ever mine or anybody like me, but that's where you then connect. And I think that had your family been living had Gaston been of the Facebook generation, right, that is what would have happened. But I mean, this idea of because they were such devoted parents, but suddenly they're separated. They could be alive, they could be dead, they don't know. Gaston sent his family off into the unknown.
Yes, and didn't hear from them and didn't know whether they'd arrived. When he sent them away from Greece, he didn't know. He didn't hear for a couple of weeks, and there was the fall of France, and then he had to decide what to do. And all he really wanted, you know, all he really wanted was to be reunited with his family. And you know, back to Camus, between justice and my mother, I choose my, I mean, he heard de Gaulle's call on the radio in June 1940 from London, the BBC, the famous BBC radio address saying, "Frenchmen, come join me." And he wavered. And then he thought, I mostly care, above all, I care about my family. And I think, you know, those are things that we don't know unless and until we're thrown into that, God forbid, thrown into such precarious and terrible situations. We don't know, you know.
But I mean, for you, obviously, it has become that. You're if this is anything to go by, I mean, but it has, your family has become, it is the central pillar of your life. Would you say still, for your generation?
Yeah, I mean, the people who inspired this book are all deceased, or else I wouldn't have written. People say, "How did you manage to write?" I was like, "Well, you wait till they die," and then you realize I might soon also be dead, so time to get on with it. But right, I mean, but certainly, I think those priorities. It's interesting, and I don't know whether it's because of as I say, I'm a lapsed Protestant, but the underlying Catholic stuff, or whether it's a displacement thing or a Mediterranean thing. But when I went to university and here in the States, and my American friends saw how much this was well before cell phones, how much I spoke to my parents on the phone, they were alarmed and dismayed. Right, but I was alarmed and dismayed that people might speak to their parents once a month. That seemed mad to me. But how do you know what's up?
Yeah. I mean, another kind of love, of course, is romantic love, and there is this huge. I mean, no spoilers here, but there is this huge. I suppose what do you call it? This huge connection which kind of blights everything that comes after. Nobody can ever live up to that love.
I think in French they call it a grand amour, a great love. And one of the things about growing up with parents who didn't get on very well is that I thought, my life it sucks being me because my parents don't get on very well. And then I grew up and I realized, actually, it's really not much better if your parents get on super well. Right, that's a whole other set of problems. So really, I mean, parents are as Philip Larkin, right? They F you up, your mom and dad, right? I feel like so that was part of what for me the book is about, is this the mythologizing, right, that goes on is in some ways, this gets this couple through a lot of stuff, but it also has lots of rough fallout.
I just want to tease apart a little bit more how you go about deciding which bits you're going to embellish, which bits you're going to completely make up, and which bits you'll keep.
So the bit that I read, that's why we started there, because I was going to say, so I know from my aunt's letters to my father, who was studying in the States at the time, that a car did come up on the curb and hit her. And I know, not from anything she ever said, but from reading the autobiography of Zora Driff, who was instrumental in the FLN fight for Algerian freedom. And if you've seen the Battle of Algiers, if anybody's seen the movie, The Battle of Algiers, she's one of the characters in the Battle of Algiers who sort of slips a backpack or a handbag under a chair and boom. She leaves and boom. Anyway, and she became a political figure in the FLN after independence. And I know from her autobiography that she was the same age as and at the same school as my aunt from the age of 12 through high school, and then also in the same course at university in the first year. And so, and my aunt never spoke about her. But I thought, I know that the character that was my aunt was completely oblivious to the fact, I mean, this is set in 1953, the War of Independence started in 1954, so it was already, the revolutionary movement was underway. But, as many of us can be, the Denise figure was oblivious. So worrying about what dress to wear to a party, not worrying about, not thinking about these larger matters of politics. And so I made a sort of narrative decision to have her knocked over by them, literally, just to have that enter in that way, trying to capture both the obliviousness and some way the inescapability.
And when it comes down to identity and where they belong, where you belong, there is this big family apartment in France, but then we've got all these other places in the world. We've got Australia, Canada. Where for them did they really belong, and where do you really belong?
I think in the novel, that earlier point about family, I think family was the locus of belonging, and I think that I think it's so often about so many different experiences. You know, I wrote an early book of mine was a novella about included a novella about a Ukrainian woman based on my aunt's housekeeper who was taken by the Germans for forced labor and then ended up in Canada as a DP, as a displaced person. And she had been a child on a collective farm in Stalin's Ukraine. And to her totally American son, who was a successful engineer with a, good business and a cottage and a boat and grandchildren, children, that he and his children had no conception of what she had lived through or who she, they may have known the facts, but they couldn't know. We couldn't know what she lived through. And I feel that that's true of my father's life for me, that I can't really know what he lived through, and that for most of the time, I managed not fully to be aware of it. And I think that, I think that's what fiction is for. I don't know how many of you may have read The Lady with the Little Dog, which is a beautiful Chekhov story. And in it, Gurov, who has an adulterous affair with the woman in Yalta, who's the lady with the little dog, and then he goes home and he can't stop thinking about her. And he's just obsessed with her and he wants to see her again. And he thinks he's taking his child to school and he thinks to himself, how can it be that the thing that is most important to me, nobody else knows about? And then the next thought he has is, that's true for everyone. And I feel like that's what fiction enables us to see or feel or understand or have some access to, is all the things that people don't say at the dinner party and all the things that people, experience and go through in a day that aren't on the surface. And how there's a miracle in the not sharing, because how would we all proceed if we all knew? But there's also some way in which if we pause and think and know that about one another, that maybe we can find compassion.
No, absolutely. Literature as an empathy generator, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was talking to a few people before we came in, and they were so excited that they were coming to see you. And I said, well, what do you really want to know? What should I ask her? And they are long-standing fans of your work. 6 books, it's a lot. And they wanted to know how you do it, about your process, about things like, when you're writing, can you read other fiction? Can you listen to music?
These are good questions. And I feel like the honest answer, which is super unhelpful, is I don't know. But I'll try.
Listen, we had a deal that you would not give me any one-word answers.
I wouldn't do that. Yeah. So I think I'm always reading. I feel as though actually that for me reading is, I have a sister who exercises every single day. And it would be great if I were a person who exercised every single day, but I can tell you I can go a really long time without exercising, and it doesn't really, I'll go for it, but it doesn't really bother me. But I can't not read, right? And that's actually a habit that is my sanity. It's almost, again, earlier today in the neuroscience conversation, it was about how dreaming sort of clears your brain, but I feel for me reading actually helps clear my brain, and I kind of need to do it. So I couldn't write a book ever if I had to stop reading.
Does it not influence your voice then?
I don't think so, no. Or maybe it does, who knows? I guess I feel about that we're, the influences are so constant and so many. No, I don't worry about that.
Yeah. And what about music?
I love music. I couldn't listen to anything with words and write. Words are the problem. My husband has, I don't know if it's literal, but he's pretty close to face blindness, and he's musical and he has very good ear, and so he will recognize somebody when they speak and he'll know their voice. He's the kind of guy who the car goes by and he says BMW and then turns around. And I'm the sort of person that music that doesn't have words, you have to play it to me 20 times before I will say, oh, I know that. You can, otherwise, so I can listen to beautiful music without, classical music or it could be contemporary music also, but without words I can listen. But words are like a.
Where did the whole word thing start for you, though, in terms of growing up in a literary household, the things that you were reading, the things that were influencing? I mean, you've referenced so many kind of erudite novelists and writers. Clearly, a reader from an early age, but what kind of reading?
When I was a kid, so I decided I wanted to be a writer. As soon as it was made clear to me that was the thing people did, was make stories up. There's Tom Stoppard in the Hermione Lee biography, the playwright Tom Stoppard says he feels about he went to a boarding school where they all had chores and they got a chit each week with the chore. It might be cleaning the toilets or changing the sheets, and the best chit to get was art room, because you got to go clean up the art room, but actually also make some art. And he said, I feel like I got the art room chit for life, right? And I do. I feel like the thing of like, what do you do? I make up stories for life, right? Like, tell that to any 6-year-old. Isn't any 6-year-old gonna be like, can I do that? So I just wanted to do that. That's all I wanted to do. And I wanted, when I read Watership Down, I loved reading as a kid. Like my mother would yell at me because I would wake up really early in the morning and just stay at the weekend and just stay in bed reading, and she would think I was sleeping, and actually I was, and then she'd find out, you've been awake? But when I read Watership Down, and I said very, very pretentiously, I said, that's what I want to do. I feel that as children, we are not largely taken seriously enough. And I want to write more grown-up novels for children. That's what I want to do.
Makes me feel how I felt towards your aunt, frankly. A small child.
Right, totally.
But, I mean, how great, though. How
Totally.
great. Do you know, I interviewed the guy that wrote Bright Eyes, the song from the film of Watership Down the other day. He's also the guy that I don't know if an American audience knows this, but who wrote the Womble song.
Oh, wow.
But he was writing all about the death of his brother. That's what that song was about. And I think that's why it's so desperately tragic. So was it tragedy that was drawing you in? By the way, we're about to come to you, so you've got to think of your questions, because I'm going to ask you to wave at me. But just go there for me.
Was it tragedy? I think I've always been in touch, with my dark side. You too?
Yeah.
I feel like doom and gloom, the voice of doom and gloom, but less so now. Less so now. Less so now. I feel like actually I'm a much more optimistic person than I was at 12.
But how does that happen? Is it an aging thing?
Yeah, I feel, I don't know if you have this. I think just back, maybe a place to end is back to that sort of epigenetic thing. I was the person who never believed there'd be a tomorrow, right? I never believed, and I think that's because my father never believed there'd be a tomorrow. And he didn't say there won't be a tomorrow, but you get that message. So I'm the person who oh, I'm coming to town. Shall we make a plan? Well, it's not that convenient. I'd have to travel, I'll do it. I'll travel 2 hours. I'll stand on my head. I'll, wait in the rain. No problem. Because if somebody says, could we do it next year? I think, but there might not be next year, right? So I think one of the things about spending a certain amount of time on the planet is you're like, usually there's a next year. Until there isn't, obviously, but there are more next years, If at 12 you think there aren't going to be any, then you get to your 50s and you're like, there have been quite a few.
And really that's what I wanted to get back to, was the fact that Chloe, our only sort of narrative character here, the narrating character, does feel like that all the time. She feels so responsible for the world, and that all of these things she has to worry about. And really, I just wanted to know that for you, just to make me feel better, that this has moved on, and that you as Chloe are not still
this is our therapy.
anxious.
Our therapy session. I'm so much less anxious than I was.
But that child, that's how you felt,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And my answer to you would be like, don't all children?
Yeah.
But I actually think, there's a big crisis of anxiety in our culture now for kids. Yes, I think that sense of, yes. So I one of the things that my actual grandfather. I don't think it's in the novel. But he really felt like part of the Navy training was to be a leader, you're optimistic. And you're optimistic even when you know there's nothing to be optimistic about. We have an obligation, if we're leading, to be optimistic. And I actually think I've reached a stage of life where I feel that.
And is that because you're a mother? Because being a parent, you are a leader. And how do your children feel? Are they affected by that same stream of intergenerational trauma or the epigenetics?
I don't know. I have one anxious and one not so anxious. But above all, like I feel like one of the great things about I don't mean this as a criticism of our great nation. It is a little bit the land of Lethe, right? It is a little bit like the land of the lotus eaters. So my children really have very, very little awareness of any of this, right? Like they're living in the now.
Have they read it?
My daughter's read it, yeah.
And
she likes it. I mean, you'd have to ask her when I'm not in the room. What's she gonna say? What's she gonna say? She said she liked it. I don't know.
So, listen, there are a couple of people out there with microphones, and I'm so sorry, ushers brandishing mics, but I don't know your names, so I'm just going to point. We've got 2 questions here. So if we start, please, with the person right there, right next to you there. No, there, behind you. There we go. That person waving at you there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. As an aspiring writer, I'm actually in the process of trying to write about my family history in France and Argentina in World War I. And maybe I'm looking for validation or absolution as to why I've decided on fiction versus the story that my entire family wants me to write. I wonder if for you too, I just didn't want everybody's opinion to get put in about, oh no, well, she wasn't that way, and oh no, he wasn't this way. That fiction gives you the freedom to create the characters the way you want as a way to avoid family feuds.
Yeah.
Well, I think there absolutely. So I think fiction, this may be an untrue thing, but I tell it to my students saying it's true. I'm a fiction writer, but I read somewhere, and I swear I didn't make this up, but maybe it wasn't true. I didn't fact check it. That in the Torah it says, "You will not raise pigs on the land of Israel," which does not mean there are no pigs in Israel. They are raised on pallets. And I think of fiction as the pallet, right? It's the room for air to get in. So it isn't sitting on the ground of fact, and nobody can really be sure whether the pallet is this or a mile high, right? And it seems as though that shouldn't be important, but it really is. It really is. I think that sense that there's a freedom, and as I say, like I can alter facts with a sense of the whole story in mind. With a sense of where things will ultimately go, because reality is sort of inconvenient. And when you're reading something that purports to be fiction, and you think that scene's only there because it happened. That's why there's no other reason for that scene to be in the story except that it actually happened. And then you think, as an editor, take it out.
Are you tempted by memoir, though? And I ask this, as you know, as a victim of memoir.
Yes, I'd love to talk to you about...
Yeah, but not now.
Not now. Okay. Yes and no. Yes and no. No.
Okay, that's fine. Lots of questions from the audience, so we'll come back here. Can we come down here to this lady here? Just here. Thank you.
Excuse me. First of all, obviously, you are one of our favorite writers. I think I've read every single book you've written.
Thank you.
But the book that I keep, I don't know why, is The Emperor's Children. I love that book, but it's interesting because there's not one character I really like. So, do you know, did you just say in your previous response that you know where the story's going, the whole story.
Yeah.
So you knew where you were taking these characters. Where did they come from?
Where did the characters come
Yeah.
from? So
I
the
mean,
Empress.
it's the characters are just, I just, I'm
Oh.
curious.
Well, so The Emperor's Children is a novel that was published almost 20 years ago and is about a group of friends, fairly recent university graduates in their 20s, who want to sort of make it in the New York media world in the sort of run up to 9/11. And one of them has a cousin who's younger, who comes from upstate New York, comes from Watertown, New York, and is sort of full of idealism and is sorely disillusioned. His uncle, the father of this character, Marina, he's a sort of prominent journalist and sort of public figure, and his nephew looks up to him hugely, and then is disillusioned. And it's true, nobody behaves entirely well. There are many things I would say. One is that I guess I'm always interested in flaws, and I feel as though that there is a titration of, we're all flawed, right? Like, few are the people who get up in the morning and think, how evil can I be today, right? Like, maybe a couple, but there aren't many, right? And most of us get up and think, like, I'm doing my best, I'm not bad, I'm all right, I'm doing my best. And so I'm interested in that, in, like, what does it mean I was on a plane a week or two ago. It was literally like 8 a.m, and I didn't want hot, so I asked for a Diet Coke, and the guy asked for a Scotch, neat. And it was 8 a.m, and I didn't ask. I wasn't brave enough, but I wanted to say, like, is that a plane thing or like an everyday thing? Right? Like, because you know what I mean? Like, he's doing his best, but like, those are sort of two different things. Like, it's a plane thing. Like, I'm on a plane. The people are like, I can have a cigarette. I'm on holiday in Europe. It's all right. Right? But it's a different thing if it's an everyday thing, Everybody's doing their best. So I guess for me, I don't see them as that likability question. I feel like here we all are doing our best, however crappy that might be. Yeah.
We've probably only got time for one, possibly two very short questions. So somebody there has had their hand up for a very long time. Yep. Thank you.
The first opening lines of this book are very stunning, but particularly the end of it, I want to save life. I'm not going to be mean enough to ask you like what that means, because I know that the book is what that means, but I just wanted to invite you to speak a little bit more on that concept of I want to save life through your writing and fiction.
Thank you. Again, this sort of sense of one of the things that happens with the passage of time and the departure of people that we love, and they live in our heads so vividly, and their material worlds have vanished, and their voices we hear, but we can't touch them. And I do think, I think to myself about language. I'm always trying to impress upon my students what a force language is, and that if you sit down and read Tolstoy's Childhood, Boyhood, Youth, which is the first thing that he wrote, which is semi-autobiographical, but suddenly it's like walking through an open window into an estate, a rural estate in Russia in 1830. And you're just there. And isn't that an incredible thing? Sorry to sound like Pollyanna, but that we can make squiggles on paper and get stuff from inside my head to inside your head across cultures and generations. I mean, man. Right? Like, don't talk to me about ChatGPT, right? I feel like, let's talk about what's actually wondrous. And so I feel as though at this point, what I feel about writing is that a lot of it is like I'm running from the seashore with my hands like this and some water in my hands and it's running through my hands the whole time. And I'm just seeing, can I get any to the top of the beach? Can I get any of it to the top of the beach? And if you don't tell the stories, then nobody told the stories. And I also feel like, sorry, I'm sounding Pollyannish, but like you can go with a tape recorder and record your grandmother. You can write it down in bullet points. You know, there are notebooks that I have that my father never wrote anything hardly, but they're little bullet points. And it's like, part of the book was sort of trying to sort of reconstitute a dried vegetable. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like it's not just about, you know, writing a book to be published. It's actually about saving all that is, that otherwise vanishes.
Claire, that's so beautiful. I'm so sorry if you didn't have an opportunity to ask a question, but here's what's going to happen. The squiggles from inside Claire's head can belong to you because you can buy her book.
Thank you, Georgina. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And she'll sign it for you, right? You'll be doing a signing.
Well, I'd like to thank Claire and Georgina for a really stimulating and dynamic session. I'd obviously like to thank the audience who've been so engaged. It really felt like eavesdropping on an encounter between two people who've just met, and I know you have just met, an hour or so ago, and who discover you've got a lot in common. You know, Claire as a very established and much admired writer, Georgina immersed in literature and talking about stories, talking about books, talking about memories, the memories of other people, talking about displacements, and bringing your book to life. So thank you both very, very much.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you for coming.
I'd also like to thank Laura Gates, our board member and sponsor of this session, and all our sponsors. The festival wouldn't happen without any of you, so thank you very much. And now, what you've all been waiting for, instructions of how you're going to be able to get Claire to sign her book, this strange, eventful history. Well, the book will be on the Buxton bookstalls, as you probably noticed it, some of their tables coming in. They're our official festival bookseller, have been from the very beginning. Ideally, it would be best if you could go out through the back doors, walk through the courtyard, which will lead you then into the table where Claire will be signing. But if you lose your way, somebody will direct you to the bookstore. Once again, thank you very much, Claire and Georgina.
Thank you.